Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for you to take your seats. The show is about to begin.
Musical, lyrical lingo. Every episode a new bingo. Laugh and sing, go with the flow. Tune in as the memories grow.
Hello and welcome to Musical Lyrical Lingo. We're your hosts, Tim
and LJ. Today and every week we will be discussing musicals, but specifically what they taught us. But we probably won't be doing any teaching this week.
Yeah, and we're not on our own.
No!
We have someone much more qualified in the world of musical theatre.
Knowledge.
And what it teaches us, right?
We feel very underprepared.
I don't feel I'm smart enough to be on the call this week, to be quite honest with you. We are really, really lucky to be joined by John Bruschke today. Hi, John.
Hey, I feel like I've been over-complimented.
Definitely not.
Listen, you better be brilliant today, John.
How do I live up to that introduction? Oh, no.
Yeah. John, where are you joining us from today?
So I'm a professor at Cal State Fullerton. Today I'm in the city of Fullerton, sitting in my office, and from my window you can actually see Disneyland off out there on the horizon. That's,
if only we were there. Wouldn't that be lovely? Look out the window and see Disneyland.
Dude, I would do anything to look out my office window and see Disneyland.
I know. John, you have your very own podcast, Theatre History and Mysteries, where you take a musical theatre production and you deep dive into questions it raises and the answers it provides. So quite similar to our podcast, Musical Lyrical Lingo, where we look at musical theatre and what it taught us. However, you're so much smarter than us. I mean, we do a musical in one episode, but the musicals you choose, you have so much detail and so much research and background to them that you can go across 6 or 7 podcasts just on the one musical. But tell us, in your own words, sum up your podcast and what it's all about for our listeners.
Thank you. Yeah, when I'm in my living room with my wife who got her PhD at MIT and my daughter's taking 17 AP classes or something, unless the cat is in the room, I'm the third smartest person there. So I appreciate all of your, all the props you're giving me. So I'm not a great musical theater audience member because I'll go and I'll watch the show and I always come away with like 17 other questions about the backstory. Right, so I remember actually watching Les Mis in the theaters, and I saw that really bad 1999 movie was when I first saw it, and I came out thinking, man, there's got to be more to the story than that. It was a great book, and now it's this long-running musical, and so I would always come away asking questions like, so what was the book about? That was about the French Revolution. What happened in the French Revolution? What part of the French Revolution are they talking about? And that's always what I wanted to know more about. And, so I would just dive into grabbing all the books I could to read about shows like that. And there are always just absolutely crazy connections. And much like the two of you, I'm always at the end of that interested in, there's some lesson about theater in here. What makes the show work as a piece of theater? And then there's always some life lesson in there. Like this, 100 million people have seen Cats. This can't just be about who gets to go to the Heaviside layer, right? There's got to be some deeper message in there that tells us, something about the human experience. And so that's what I'm always interested in and always looking for when I go into the musicals and their research.
Love it. Love it.
How do you choose then the musicals that you've done? So, your back catalogue, you've got episodes on Cats there. You've mentioned Les Mis. I'm really looking forward to the Les Mis ones. I just spent the last year working on, because it's obviously the 40th anniversary of Les Mis.
Yep.
So in the UK, they granted performance license for it to be performed by amateur companies for the first time. So I've just spent a year working on that. So it's still a bit. My life has had too much Les Mis in it, so I've left your Les Mis episodes for the meantime. But I do look forward to jumping into them. But you've done Les Mis, you've done Phantom. You know, how do you choose the musical that you want to cover on your podcast?
Well, so I'd start with ones that were interesting to me, right? So I'd start with Les Mis. I would start with The Man of La Mancha, just because that was fascinating. That was another one where it's like, wow, there's something important here. And then honestly, I would just get to the end of like episode 8, and I would say, and the next one will be cats. That would just sort of give me the direction. But I have subsequently learned the mega musical, which is sort of an Andrew Lloyd Webber UK export, is its own genre. And so, I'm in Fullerton. Chapman University is the stone's throw from us, and there's a woman there named Jessica Sternfeld who wrote the book that is titled The Mega Musical, that traces the history of that. And so she would say there's kind of a golden age of musical theater that starts with Oklahoma and goes through Fiddler in the Roof. Then there's kind of the Stephen Sondheim era. Then there's a little bit of a malaise, and then all of a sudden Andrew Lloyd Webber explodes on the scene with Jesus Christ Superstar, and then now they're mega musicals. Right, they're now productions that run for 10 years, 20 years, and make billions of dollars. So I just started. Your question was, how do I pick it? And the answer is, I just kind of started with the ones that I know are a big deal, but I don't really have a firm grip in my own mind about what is going on with the story. And the other one I had done is Phantom of the Opera. There is an interesting UK This is kind of what I have discovered happens every time you start researching a big musical. So Phantom of the Opera is written by Gaston Leroux. He's French, obviously, and it's set in the Paris Opera House. Then it becomes a movie, silent film, that has Lon Chaney in it. And that film was taken to the UK to be released in the UK, and they used the British military to actually carry the film from the boat to the theaters, which caused such a massive public uproar. There were hearings, in the British Parliament, and eventually legislation passed that banned the Phantom of the Opera from being shown in the UK, because there was outrage that there was a UK film industry of its own, and why were government resources and the military resources being spent protecting this American film? Shouldn't they be doing more to promote the British film industry? And so, interesting fact: Phantom of the Opera, the silent film, almost never got shown in the UK. It was a big deal everywhere else in the silent film era, but not on your island there.
Yeah. I've just listened to all of your Phantom series, and that was one of the standout facts that I just went, that's insane. Like, that is insane that happened. Also, the other interesting fact that I took from those episodes were about the original opera house, like there being like a lake down in the very basement or the pits of the theater, and I was like, that's so bizarre. Like that's weird, right?
Well, right. So one thing that is always interesting to me, there's a great musical, The Phantom of the Opera, right? It's fantastic. And so you go back and say, but what was necessary for it? Like, where did that come from? And the story is Andrew Lloyd Webber went to his bookstore and picked up a copy of the old book, and he read it and decided that would make a good opera. And the question was, well, why did that even happen? And the bridge between them is that movie, the Lon Chaney classic silent film. So then you go back and say, okay, well, but the book was written by Gaston Leroux. What was he writing about? And it's set in the Paris Opera House. And famously, their bodies, cadaver, skeletons that are in the catacombs. And there was this love triangle. And so then you can ask yourself, was that historically accurate? Are there really skeletons in the basement of the Paris Opera House? So as you're running down that rabbit hole, you discover the answer is yes. Yes, at the end of the French Revolution, there was the Paris Commune, which was sort of its own little independent thing, separate from the French government. The French government came in and crushed it. They put prisoners in the basement of that Paris Opera House. Those prisoners passed away, and those are the skeletons that were referenced in Gaston Leroux. And as you keep running down that rabbit hole, you say, but that's not the the Paris Opera House that the original story came from. There was a love triangle. There was about the previous Paris Opera House that had burned down. And so like, wow, that, so there really was a woman who was really in love with somebody who was competing for her affection with a soldier in the French army, and he did die a terrible death. And so you think, okay, well, that's fascinating. And then if you keep researching, you discover, and that never really happened. There was actually this kind of famous German opera that was dark and mysterious and very Gothic, and they had fabricated the story, but released it in multiple different newspapers at exactly the same time to try to capitalize on, kind of the mystery of it, to say there's a real story here to get people to race there. So one thing I just find absolutely fascinating about knowledge and musical theater and life is you keep going back, and it gets stranger and stranger and stranger till you couldn't, if you wrote that as a movie script, they would say this is not believable.
Yeah.
And throw it back at you. But it does make it more fun for me to see Phantom. You see Phantom of the Opera on the stage, and knowing that, there's a long backstory to this before it gets to the gets to the stage.
Well, I have to say, not that my husband will help us a little bit on this podcast, but your podcast has overtaken our podcast, and yours is now his favorite musical theater podcast.
So thanks very much for that, John, because he's supposed to be our executive producer. And he's now trying to jump ship. Do you know what I mean? So,
yes.
What's also really fun is I love that you never miss the opportunity to pursue the mystery or those bizarre coincidences. I also love your one-man trek for defined supernatural in all of the the musicals that you look at. Where does that come from? Is that a genuine interest you have in the supernatural, or those mystery kind of things? Or I love that part of your podcast. Where does it come from?
Well, thank you for that. I really enjoy it. I don't have a better answer other than, as a kid, I always liked Halloween.
Okay.
And, there's definitely, as I meet other people who are like, there's the ghost chaser, real paranormal investigators. And to me, I don't object to it. It's just that it kind of stops being fun for me at that point. Like if you really want to, so I just think the question is there a spirit world? And just about every human civilization or society that has ever existed believes there is one. But it's not the same everywhere. And to me, that is just intellectually a fascinating question. I do really believe there is something that is a spirit world out there. I think most people would say there's a spiritual component to my life. Even if it's not like I'm a hardcore religious person, kind of intuitively people feel that there's a connection to the cosmos now. And then if you're like, well, if we can find that and define it and name it, and it's a scary ghost, that's not quite as much fun to me as just dwelling in the uncertainty of it all. As long as we don't know for sure, it can be fun and you can play with it. And as soon as you know for sure, then you can't. But just ghost stories are fun. Halloween's fun. And so for cats, this was sort of interesting, but Cats is, of course, based on some poems by T.S. Eliot. So if you go back to look at the life of T.S. Eliot, and he was deeply involved in the occult. There are academic journal articles written that have titles like T.S. Eliot and the Occult. It wasn't like a distant connection. It was like this guy was attending seances, and members knew everybody who was into it at the time. So that to me was fascinating. And I had read something about the very first member of the T.S. Eliot line was Andrew Eliot, who emigrated from the UK, and ended up in Salem, Massachusetts, where he was an accuser. He accused other people of witchcraft. Then he was a juror He served on the Salem witchcraft trials. Then he recanted all of it, and he was one of the signatories on this thing that recanted. So here's like, if you were to say American Ghost Stories, what's the first one? You would say that's got to be the Salem witch trials, right? Like, you can still do Salem witch tours in Salem, Massachusetts, and then just to trace that forward 200 years and discover that is a direct relative of T.S. Eliot, who was deeply into the cult, and then he wrote Cats.
Yes.
That's just there's some kind of strange connection, some good ghost story that surrounds all of that, and to me those are just fun to chase.
Well, speaking of connection, our podcast, we've known each other since we were very little, and it was musical theatre that brought us together, and we're still best friends 34 years later.
Well, but since you both look about 29, I'm not sure I can.
Oh,
thank you. You see, John, this is why we like you so much.
So we love musical theatre, our whole point of our podcast is what it taught us and how we have learned not only life lessons and skills, but we also learned what words meant just from singing a song. Like the number one for me was fratricide and Joseph. That was the first time I'd heard of that and then knew what that word meant. So what do you think? What are the most profound life lessons you've personally taken away from musicals or shows?
I guess I think that for a show to really resonate with an audience, it has to say something that's kind of a core truth about human life, right? It has to be something big enough that can resonate with a lot of people in a lot of different places with a lot of different backgrounds. So if you were to take The Man of La Mancha, right, that is, of course, written by Cervantes. So that guy, he was a soldier. That's his life started. He's a soldier, and he got shot in a famous battle. He's so now he's a wounded civilian, but his job is actually to commandeer stuff that would become part of the Spanish Armada that famously lost, right? So his job, okay. And in the middle of all that, he gets thrown in a medieval prison in Turkey. So he's captured after the battle as he's doing this other job. And he makes 4 separate escape attempts. Just imagine trying to escape from a prison once. Now make it a medieval prison. Now make it you're escaping 4 times. And then you get out of that and you spend your life working for the Spanish government, which you deeply believe in, only to discover everything that you have done is in the service of the Spanish Armada, which then completely fails, right? The end of the empire, right? You have been part of the biggest failure in Spanish military history. That's your contribution to the world. And in the meantime, he's a playwright, and he's writing all these plays, and he's frankly not very good. And it is at that point that he is accused by the Spanish Inquisition of heresy, of doing things, because he's essentially on behalf of the Spanish government going into cities and trying to requisition stuff that they're going to use for the Armada, but the only entity that has anything is the church. So he's essentially taking church resources to give to the Spanish government for this military thing, and so he is accused of heresy, but it's not even by the people that he's taking this stuff from, right? Commandeer means I'm taking it from you. I'm not buying it, taking it. That's not a popular job, right? Showing up and taking people's stuff. So he is accused because one of the guys that he was escaping with had actually sold them out to their captors. And that guy knew he was in trouble. So he thought, I will falsely accuse Cervantes of being the guy who sold us out. And I'll turn the Inquisition on him because the Inquisition will kill anybody. And then it actually turns out he is such a good guy. All the people he's been taking stuff from show up to his defense, as do all the former prisoners and all the former soldiers. Okay, so now you are Cervantes. You were 58 years old in 1600 years, right? 58 is not, that would not be unusual now.
Yeah.
Okay, but in the year 1600, making it to 58 years old as a former soldier who's been shot and been to prison is unusual. And it is at that moment he sits down to write Don Quixote. and proceeds to write what is now widely regarded as the best novel in the Spanish language ever. It has never gone out of print. Right? He writes it. It's published in 1605, and it has never gone out of print right up till now. So, I mean, life lesson. What did we just learn about art and life? And I think part of it is, art isn't really something that this dilettantish thing that really pristine bookish people do, right? You can be a soldier from a Spanish prison who's been accused by the Spanish Inquisition and still produce fantastic art, right? Art comes from experience, from human experience. It can resonate. That's true. And then what else does that tell us about life? I mean, there's an awful lot of don't let setbacks discourage you, right? Maybe getting thrown in a medieval prison would have discouraged some people, but not Cervantes. Maybe getting caught the first 3 times you tried to escape would have discouraged some people, but not Cervantes. So I think those are life lessons. And here's what is just fascinating to me. He had tried repeatedly to be a playwright and never really caught on. But then he writes this book and it immediately becomes an international sensation. So like in 1605, within 2 years, there are copies of it showing up in festivals in North America, right? So the book has to get from Spain across the ocean and then find an audience there. I mean, it's just massive. So you would think maybe the message from God and the universe was, dude, you should write novels. You're really good at that. And he immediately says, okay, well, that was cool, but what I really want to be is a playwright. And he spends 10 more years writing plays that all fail. None of them even get produced. Right? He's not a good playwright. And so then finally, after 10 years, he writes the second part of Don Quixote. So if you buy the book today, it now comes with the 2 volumes put together. But at the time, there was a 10-year gap between them. And it's just as good as the first one. And so it, again, sells out immediately and becomes part of this iconic Spanish novel. So, how many life lessons are there in there? And, kind of it's like, on the one hand, never give up.
Yeah.
Don't get discouraged by the obstacles. On the other hand, it's like, figure out when it's time to quit. Like, you've succeeded as an author, as a novelist, right? And you're not a good playwright, so just write more novels, and that'll be okay. And I did,
There's got to be a cutoff. 10 years, he maybe should have stopped at 5.
Yes, but to get back to the supernatural, but then of course it has to become a musical, and it originally started as a stage play, and got an audience in the United States on television. So it first aired on TV in 1960. And what was kind of interesting at that point was 1960 was, of course, the year of the first presidential debate. The famous Nixon-Kennedy debate happened on American television. And the big thing about that wasn't that it was a good debate. The big thing about that was it was the first ever televised debate, which meant it was the first time most people had a television to watch something. And so TV had emerged as a medium, but there wasn't a lot of regular programming at that point. And so they were like, what do we do? And so one thing that would happen is the producers would say, every Saturday night, we're going to show a play. And so they contacted the author of Man of La Mancha, and he put it on television. And then it slowly emerged. It went from there to eventually becoming a musical. But the good ghost story there is, as he's working, so the author of this is trying to move it from a play to a musical, and went to a restaurant in Palm Springs, which is about 2 hours from where I'm sitting right now, Palm Springs, California, at this restaurant that has 5 tables, and it has the person who's the owner is also the cook and the server and the busser, and the only employee of the whole place. And her menu has 1 item on it. So she wakes up that day, and whatever she wants to make, that's what they're going to eat. So author goes sit down. The woman comes up and says, "Oh, by the way, I'm also a psychic." And he says, "Okay, well, I'm trying to make this thing a play. What's going to happen?" So she, flips down her tarot cards and she says, "It's going to be a huge success. It's going to take over your life, but it's not all going to be positive." And then everything she says completely comes true. It does become a huge success. It's a smash Broadway hit. But right in the middle of that, he has a panic attack that is so severe, he can't get out of bed. And he was like, it did take over it was a success, like she said. It did completely take over everything else I was doing, just like she said. And And it did, in fact, have a huge, kind of in a Frankenstein way, right? My creation took off,
Yeah.
and then it kind of came back to bite me.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, so
It's
fascinating.
incredible. I have been so excited to do this interview because your episodes are just so interesting and there's so much content in there. Like, how long does it take you to do the reading and to do the prep for one of the musicals that you, obviously it varies depending on what the musical is, but how long does it take you to prepare for an episode?
All right. So I'll just give my quick little advertisement for college debate. There is in the UK, this was I don't know how to describe this. There's in the UK there are debating societies, but they're typically back at the pub. Everyone has some drinks, trade barbs, insults, and jokes.
Yeah.
And try to say something serious.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as an undergraduate, like 35 years ago, I actually qualified to be the American touring team that was going to go on this British tour, and then it ended up getting canceled at the last minute. But I was able to have host some British debaters on our campus back in the day. But in the United States, competitive academic debate is as hyper competitive. Imagine the World Cup, right?
Okay.
That the students will compete. I once judged a debate where I think it was Iowa against Northwestern, and I think it was nuclear proliferation. But the team from Iowa read like 27 pieces of evidence to disprove something that Harvard said from 27 different sources. And then Northwestern stood up and picked one of them out of the middle of the pack and said, "Oh, you read this quote from this source, but that used a footnote. Do you know what that footnote is a reference to?" And Iowa did not. And then Northwestern proceeded to stand up, say, "Here was the footnote. Now here's our indictment of the source in the footnote in the midst of this." I mean, it is just so competitive, you can't believe it. So, there's kind of this joke, the difference between a professor and a newscaster is a professor starts to learn more and more and more about less and less and less until they know practically everything about practically nothing. So I specialized in left-footed toe disease that are bacterially infested with 3 different treatments, right? That's what a professor's life is, super focused on. And a newscaster, by contrast, knows less and less about more and more and more and more until they know practically nothing about practically everything.
Yeah.
And right in the middle of that is the college debate coach, because you go to the tournaments, there are wins and losses, and then they always happen on weekends, and you come back on Tuesday and you're like, okay, what is USC saying today? What did Harvard have that we didn't have an answer to? What did Berkeley have to say? And then you'll just compile these mountains of research evidence to handle in these debates, because any issue could come up, and everyone's always trying to get a leg up and find some research somebody else did. So a typical college debate research assignment would be 200 to 300 pages of stuff from lots of different sources. So for the podcast, I foolishly thought, how hard could that be? It's just like doing a debate research assignment like I used to do for 25 years of my life when I was a competitive academic college debate coach. And I do less research than I used to, because it turns out when you're 58 years old and not 28, it takes you longer to do stuff. But I will, but my floor is always covered. There's, 5 to 8 books that are stacked there that are, some of them, I kind of read cover to cover, and some of them I found the chapter I needed, and some of them I kind of skimmed and thought I'd come back to it if I needed to. And maybe another 20 or 30 articles from academic research journals that I would, that are stacked up, that have been highlighted in some places and skimmed in others to try to pull out the interesting facts. But I will say this what I do deeply enjoy is, and in the lessons for life, right? Theater and life. There's a lot of misinformation floating around in the world, and everybody knows, like, all sides of the political spectrum can acknowledge that. Even when I talk to my students now, like, as soon as I say social media, they start rolling their eyes, right? They just know that there's a bunch of stuff there that is not true. And there are places where there is good information. It's just hard to get to. And a problem that I and my fellow academics have is we talk in really big words with long, complicated sentences that make it difficult to understand. So I very much enjoy the ability, especially the freedom of a podcast. Like when you're going a university lecture, you got to be right, you got to be on point, and you have to follow the structure and the curriculum. And one thing you get to do with a podcast is just take something interesting and talk about it for a long time. And so if I can find an interesting idea in a very dense academic article that I know a broader audience is probably not going to read, but I can, in my role as former debate coach, university professor, theater enthusiast, translate some of that dense stuff into more common and accessible ideas. That's fun for me. I really enjoy that.
Yeah, this is going to be a really hard question because it's like choosing between your babies. But is there a musical that you have done to this point that you've released where you're going, oh yeah, that was one of my favorites. I really enjoyed doing that.
The musical I enjoyed researching the most was Jesus Christ Superstar.
I'm loving that at the moment. It is so good.
Well, because because the idea is you start with what you have and then you just keep going back to find the original material. So if you do Phantom of the Opera, you can find Gaston Leroux's original novel.
Yeah.
If you do Man of La Mancha, you can find Don Quixote by Cervantes. If you do Les Mis, you get Les Mis by Victor Hugo. But if you do Jesus Christ Superstar, you find the Bible.
Yeah.
As a younger person, I was very traditionally religious in an American evangelical tradition. Like I was the kid who wore Jesus Saves t-shirts to high school. And I would still say I have a deep and abiding faith, but it's definitely not as churchy as it used to be.
Yeah.
And I had always been interested in the question, where is the original text of the Bible? And so, the hook to Jesus Christ Superstar is there's the Passion of Christ, kind of the last 8 days of his life and all the events leading up between when he gets to Jerusalem and the crucifixion. And the musical says, okay, we're gonna retell that Bible story from the perspective of Judas. That's the hook of the musical. You can't miss that about it. And so you might expect that's going to make a lot of people really mad, right? You're taking the Bible and retelling it as if as an artistic choice. Well, if you're a religious person, that seems like a dangerous thing to do. Should you be doing that? In fact, Billy Graham called Andrew Lloyd Webber blasphemous for even attempting to do that. So I was super excited to dive in there and find out, okay, so what's the original biblical story of Judas and how does that change in the musical? And oh my God, nothing disappointed me. It was absolutely fascinating to dive into that. And it turns out there is not a single biblical story of the crucifixion.
Yeah.
That, there's, of course, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Acts, which actually included in there, but that's not the chronological order that they were written in. It starts with Mark, not Matthew, and Acts comes before John. And the story slightly changes every time you weave your way through the narrative of the gospel. So that, you've probably heard there's the famous kiss, right? Judas betrays Jesus with a kiss. Well, that's in one gospel, but there's a different gospel where he doesn't do that. He just walks up and says, Jesus walks up to the people who are to arrest him and say, I'm the guy you're looking for, right? Yeah. And Judas doesn't betray anybody, and there is no kiss. Well, that's not quite the same story, and that's not even the strangest thing. There are biblical in one's version, Judas hangs himself, which is what happens in the musical. There's another version where he explodes, like literally just explodes.
Yeah.
But that, so I do think, like, what's the lesson for theater and for life? And I think even at the time, like when that movie came out in 1973, or the musical came out in 1973, the thought was there's going to be a lot of religious people who were super angry about this.
Yeah.
But as I started researching, and I was like, can you really get that mad about it? Like, because the story itself is not a single story. There's lots of ambiguity and it changes a lot. And then it ended up, there were, of course, some protests, but they were kind of muted. And I guess what I took from that is maybe there's more common sense out there than we generally believe, that if if there is in fact not a single only true interpretation of a story, and that is widely recognized even by the people who translate the Bible, maybe that means that this protest isn't really going to go anywhere or stop the show, and it didn't. Yeah. So anyway, for me, it was super fun to go diving into questions of where does the Bible come from, how does it get interpreted, how does it get translated, how many different versions of it are there, and and that was a blast.
Yeah, it's so fascinating.
I think we're on episode 3. Is there 5 episodes you've
5,
done?
yeah.
Yeah, so can't wait. Can't wait for the last 2.
I know.
Okay, well, I'm going to give you a spoil. Can I give you?
Yeah.
No. So the musical is, I'm going to retell the story of the crucifixion from the perspective of Judas. There was but what you probably have not heard of is there is in fact a lost Gospel of Judas. It's an actual book that archaeologists have discovered that was buried in a clay pot in the 4th century and discovered 2 decades after the musical happened. So now there exists on the planet Earth these dueling, here's the Jesus Christ Superstar reinterpretation that retells the gospel, the story of the crucifixion from the perspective of Judas. And 20 years after that came out, archaeologists discovered a book called the Gospel of Judas, which, as you might, expect, retells the crucifixion story from the perspective of Judas, just like the musical does. So that'll be the 5th episode, but you can just, yes, there are some absolutely stunning connections between the two of them.
How many weeks do we have to wait for that, John?
It comes out every other week, so yes. Hopefully, I think that'll come out right near Halloween. It'll be perfect.
We know what we're doing our Halloween holidays.
No, tell me.
That is a spoiler. Oh, goodness, I can't wait.
It's so good. And for those that maybe a bit like my husband, who's kind of been around musical theatre, but maybe not as intense in it like we are, your podcast really does bring another side to it where you can hook people in, and we're always trying to say that with our listeners as well. If this is a musical that you haven't heard of before, go listen to it, go see, because there might be something about it that intrigues you. So is there any musicals which you haven't done yet but you're really excited to tackle in the future?
So the next one up is Hadestown.
Love it.
So, big fans.
Thank you. Well, I am sort of shifting it occurred to me I have done too many of the mega musicals, right? Just the huge shows that everybody knows about. And I haven't done too many of the more recent ones or the, fascinating or important, but not in the canon yet. And so Hadestown is the one that it will be fun for me. And that gets us to kind of Greek mythology. Yeah. Because, we've done things about Spain and things about the UK and things about the witch trials, but we have not yet gone back to the origins of where the academy, right? So the very first university was there at the same time these Greek myths were originating. And what's fun about that is just like, Jesus Christ Superstar, if you start digging, you'll discover there isn't really just one biblical story that about the crucifixion. And if you start digging into Hadestown, which is, of course, the story of Orpheus, there isn't just one original Greek story of Orpheus. There's a couple different ones. And so that I'm looking forward to which is, something I had no idea about at the start of looking into it. I'd seen Hadestown on the stage. And so that's what got me to start looking at those original Greek myth stories. And you get back there and there's interesting stuff like, it is true Hadestown is a different take on the Orpheus story, but at the time Homer was writing about it, there were different takes on the Orpheus story, and learning how those have played out 26 centuries apart is does bring home what is the lesson that this theater has for life. And kind of the answer is, okay, well, there's this story, he turns around, he looks back, and that goes poorly for him. They were fighting about what that story meant 26 centuries ago, and we're still talking about it now. What about that event is so powerful that it can resonate for literally 26 centuries? And that's something at the core of Hadestown. That is.
Yeah. Oh, I'm excited because it's such a good musical, and even how it came to be, and came from sort of nothing and just perseverance, and then has become this really beloved musical, but still not a huge amount of people know about it. So that's exciting. I can't wait.
Yeah. Great choice, John. Great choice. What we noticed when we started our podcast was just the sheer number of musicals that are based upon a historical event or a person in history. From a historical point of view, have you come across a musical that has got the accuracy spot on, or to the other end of the scale has been so inaccurate based upon history?
I guess here's what has struck me about that the most. There, kind of the knock on Hollywood is that it will find a successful formula and regurgitate it forever. Like, how many Fast and Furious movies do we really need? Yes, the car. So this will, during the pandemic, we were all had to be in the same house. So, yeah, of course, because everyone was quarantined. And so our kind of house rule was you could put whatever you wanted on the TV, but you had to have the volume off unless everybody was watching it. Okay. And so what I started doing was I would watch the Fast and Furious movies with the volume off, just to see if I could keep up with the entirety of the plot without ever hearing an actor speaking a word. And the answer to that is yes. But what was startling to me was the amount of stock footage that was just a foot going down on a gas pedal or somebody shifting a gear. But like, honestly, 10 minutes of the movie is just jump, watching a hand shift a gear. But that makes 11 movies. So I do think, especially in the entertainment world, there's an inherent, it is appealing to say what's worked that will get an audience to get people to show up and watch it. Before I invest another $1 million in a movie or 10 years of my life trying to make a musical take off, how can I start with something that I know is going to have an appeal? And so almost everything in Hollywood, and even to a greater extent in the musicals, they start with an existing story. They kind of always do. Like the musical Six. The Wives of Henry VIII. Is that historically accurate? Well, probably not even at its point, but it has got to start with some kind of a story. And so for something like a piece of art, and even Hadestown is a pretty good example of that, there's a story. Are you true to the story? Well, you're resetting it in New Orleans, and then you're playing around with the relationship between who the different characters are. And then you kind of have a climate change story in there. Does that make you historically inaccurate? Are you now no longer accurate? And one thing while I was doing Jesus Christ Superstar is that it's, of course, a retelling of the Bible story. But it's not the only one. There are thousands of attempts to retell the Bible story, or at least some part of it, from the Ten Commandments to the Trinity Broadcast Network trying to retell the birth story of Christ. And what I kept coming across is, to try to tell the story of the Bible, you have to take what is a bunch of texts written by different people in different languages, different places over hundreds of years, and condense it to a 2-hour video that someone can watch. And to do that, you have to make choices and you have to change it. There's just no other way to do it. And so your question is, which of the stories is most accurate or least accurate? And I guess I would like to say what they have in common is they all start with something that's got a kernel of truth in it. And they all have to be modified and significantly changed for the story to be useful and worthwhile and to fit in the format of, a 2.5 hour musical theater production.
Yeah.
And the real yardstick is, did you do it in a way that was entertaining and enlightening and had its own core element of truth about it? Or did it, was it something that missed? You tried telling the story and it didn't capture what made the thing so powerful in the first place.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, Jesus Christ Superstar starts the mega musical era, right? It clearly caught on with an audience. People loved it. And as you know, the history of that was it came in the United States and flopped, right? It had an 8-month run on pre-ticket sales, but it wasn't until it went back to the UK and they fixed some of the staging stuff that then it really took off.
Yeah.
And so the artistic choice was good and it resonated and that worked. The movie of that musical came out a couple of years later, and even though it was the same songs and the same story, that retelling of it it has kind of a cult following, but nothing like musical. If you were to say, here's 2 attempts to tell the same story, this one hit and this one did not.
Yeah. It's
really subtle differences in the performances and really subtle differences in how small things completely change the way the story lands that make a difference. And so I think that I have not yet hit a story that has been so historically off it has offended me. Like, oh my God, you're doing violence to the story. But I am much more taken with how did you manage to retell it in a way to make it relevant to a contemporary audience that landed with them, as opposed to retelling a good story that still had that and missed. And there's there are nutso connections there too. The Phantom of the Opera has been massively successful in the UK.
Yeah.
Massively successful in the United States. Massively successful on international tours. And its heart, right? The heart of that story is the Paris Opera House. And the only place it has failed is in Paris.
Yeah.
How does that happen, right?
Yeah.
And to be able to answer, to me, that's the fascinating question. You're still selling the same tour. What happened? How does that happen? But
you mentioned Six and also about approaching some of the more modern musicals. Is that one that's on your list for further podcasts? Or
all right, so my eldest child has insisted the next thing be Hamilton after Hands Down.
Okay.
And my 17-year-old daughter will insist that Six follow, maybe not next, but shortly follows that, right?
Very good.
Well, I can't wait to hear how long your Hamilton is, because we had to do it over 2 podcasts and we
there's a lot going on there, John.
Oh, yeah.
And
well,
we, obviously are not taught American history, so we were pretty much the musical taught us a lot from that. But good luck, because if we did it over 2 episodes, I'm not sure how many you'll do.
Well, I will say I read the original Cherno book before the musical came out.
Okay.
I said, oh, this will be great. This will be easy. I'll just go back and pick that book up that I've already read. And I was like, I don't remember. I have forgotten at least 90% of what's in this book. So any attempt to take this and see does this match up with the musical is not. I will say my eldest child and I watched it together, and what we'd come up with, the core message is if you're in a duel, you should shoot at the other guy. Right? What's this? Aim over his head, shoot in the air, man. It's a gunfight. Shoot back.
Surely when you get to that stage, there's no other choice. Like it's not even an option. Pull the trigger.
See, always a life lesson.
Yes, that's true. Is there like a historical event that you feel deserves musical treatment?
So the United States Civil War is, of course, a bigger deal here than it is elsewhere. But that is, there have been movies that have been made about that. There are shockingly comic elements to it that I think would work well. But if you were to, if you wanted to capture what Victor Hugo thought about the French Revolution, you could find that.
Yeah.
right, in Les Mis. And if you were to say what captures the Civil War, you'd find a movie, but you wouldn't find a musical. And it just seems like that's a place where there's got to be some powerful, like if you just imagine what is the big closing number of a musical about the Civil War, that it's quite a bit. And there's actually a local theater near me called the Maverick Theater that does a version of the Civil War
Okay.
as a stage play. I think not yet as a full musical, but I do think that, if I were that would be one I would definitely show up to watch.
Yeah.
Just to see what you could do with it.
Yeah.
And the funny side note to that was, of course, the weird thing about the Civil War is that people all went to the same military academy, right? So they were all former classmates, and then many times families would be on opposite sides. So brothers would be fighting on opposite sides of the war. And at the time the book Les Mis came out, both sides loved it. And so during the battles, right, during all that dead downtime, someone would get a copy of the book and they'd just pass it around, or they'd even have readings of it. All the soldiers would get around the campfire and someone would read Les Mis. And there was actually a famous moment where a truce was called so that the spouses, the wives of the generals, could meet on neutral territory and exchange their copies of the Les Mis books, because the book's divided into 5 different parts, and it was published originally in like Harry Potter, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It came out, and so they'd have different copies, and they would meet on neutral ground to exchange their copies of Les Mis, so that they could then take it back and read it to the different companies of troops. And so,
wow,
power of literature and art and everything that is wonderful, isn't that class?
yeah. Right. And of course, both sets of soldiers saw themselves as the miserables, right? We're the ones that really have it hard, but did not find commonality enough to in the hostilities. But yeah, that does say, yes, but that moment of art, right? Why is this story resonating so much with people who are fighting against each other so fiercely, but they can agree on this art? That to me does say something about the ability of art to transcend human conflict.
Absolutely.
We probably should have asked this question at the very beginning of the podcast, John. But when did musical theatre first enter into your life? We were 4, we were bad.
Yes. Well, you and my kids have had the same life path. It was their kindergarten had a musical every year, and the first thing they did is they were the everlasting gobstopper in the Willy Wonka production.
Nice.
My experience, I was a high school debate kid. So I'd actually signed up for a metal shop class that filled up too quickly, and so they randomly assigned me to the debate thing, and then that really took off for me, and I became a high school debater, college debate coach, college debate professor, which is where it ended up. So that really was what resonated for me. But at least in the United States, they would have weekend competitions, and they'd have the theater competitions and the debate competitions at the same school at the same time. And so we'd drive out on the same bus, and all the debate kids would sit on one side and all the theater kids would sit on the other side. And there was like this icy social partition keeping us apart from one another. So it had never really been, right. It was, the theater room was right next to the debate room. Yeah. Right. So we were all public, you'd walk in front of an audience and do your thing. And it had just never been something that had stuck with me. And until my kids got into it. And then, my background had been, I'd kind of played in a bar band. Orange County was the center of punk rock, and our big thing was our bar band got to play in it's this place called the Doll Hut, but all the punk bands, Social Distortion and The Offspring, and every Orange County band, no doubt, had played there, right? Yeah. And so I had a background in music, and then the kids' musical theater would start, and they'd like, who can record the background music? And I was like, well, sure, I'm the parent who can do that. And by just watching the way the community formed around, so that when our eldest graduated from high school, I was talking to one of the other parents, and I was like, this wasn't even a thing in my life. I'd never done it before. But my kids got interested in it, and it seems to be a value. And what he said to me was the same story that you've got. He was like, I I did theater at this high school, and so did my dad. And I met my wife here.
Mm.
And now our kids are going to this theater program. I've been doing shows in this space for the last, my family has been doing it since the high school was founded, and I've been doing it for the last 45 years. And there is just something magical about the way a cast either, gels or doesn't, and something about creating together where everything you do depends so much on what lots of other people are doing.
Yeah.
Right. If you're a performer, you want to make sure the costume people don't make you look stupid.
Yeah.
You want the musicians to be able to match what you're doing when you're a little ahead, a little bit behind. You need the other actors to time the lines right. And it was just, at least in my debate world, there's you and your partner, and that relationship is much like a spouse. You know what each other's daily cycles are, but it's very just the two of you. And to me, what was amazing about theater was how many people were coming together. Like, it truly was a community. And so that was my engagement with it. And then during the pandemic, I thought, my band couldn't play anymore, and my kids had started. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to write a musical. How hard can that be? It's just a script and a bunch of songs, and and so I've now I completed that project, and it's now performed on 5 stages, and we just auditioned it last Monday, and both my kids got to be in it. And
Amazing.
So I have gone from the debate kid who wouldn't talk to the theater people to the parent of theater kids to I am now running and producing my own show with family and with in the local theater around here. And hopefully some of these lessons that the three of us are learning about life and theater will show up in that production and make it.
And maybe we have to cover your musical, because it's called, let me get the title right. Is it Change the Game?
It is Change the Game, yes.
So we should cover Change the Game in a future episode, and then have you come on and talk to us.
Yes, we'll do it. It's we're auditioning it for theaters now, and if one of them picks it up, I will definitely shoot it back to you.
Yeah, fantastic.
Share some stuff,
So
but
good.
I would love to do more of that.
Oh, well, this has been the most intellectual conversation that our podcast has had, and we are so blessed that you were able to come on and speak to us. Honestly, the words and your podcast is so interesting and exciting. I really hope that our listeners just go and listen to it and discover your world.
Go and listen to Theatre History and Mysteries, because it is absolutely brilliant. Do you yourself have a favorite musical, John?
I myself do not. It's there's songs that I like better, but it's like I said, and I do think this is first, I feel like I need to say I'm going to take the link to this episode, I'll put it on our podcast, and then this will be the most friendly, interactive thing that is on my my podcast. Like, yeah, man, why can't we hear those two talk more? You keep citing sources at it. No, like when I go to what I've noticed is an awful lot of musical theater commentary is what's your favorite show, what's your favorite song, who's your favorite performer, and that is sort of even especially in the internet sites, right? That sort of tends to dominate what is discussed, and that's important. Like, that is what theater means to a lot of people. When I approach it, I always want to think, what's the idea here? Where can that take me? What can I get into? Where and that's what is interesting about musical theater to me. And so I try to stay away from the, pick 'em, rank 'em.
Yeah.
There are times in the theater where it just hits you, and that's great. And it's different for different performances, and even of the same show.
Yeah.
So, like, we can't answer those questions. Like, when people ask what's your favorite, I'm like,
we sometimes come back with the same answer. It depends on what mood. It's a bit like music of any sort or art event. It depends, because there'll be ones which really evoke an emotion, and you love that for that reason, or one that has a memory attached to it, and it's just too hard. So we just like to do life lessons now.
Yeah.
What it's taught us.
Yes. No, that there is.
And your episode, like, your podcast has taught me so much. On musicals, I thought I knew, I knew quite well. Like, it's been really amazing. Like, I look forward to your next episode every other week.
Yeah.
It's very, very exciting. Cannot wait to finish Jesus Christ Superstar episodes, and I look forward. You will teach me about Hamilton, because I'm going to be honest with you, John, I'm still all over the place with that.
Fair enough.
No idea what's going on.
All right. Well, your side of the pond taught us about the Phantom of the Opera, and so we can teach you about Hamilton. Fair trade. All right. Hey, thank you so much. The two of you have been absolutely fantastic.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And we know that our listeners will have 100% enjoyed this as well. So thank you for joining us. And we'll be back next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Tune in as the memories grow.